Hello and welcome to another episode of the Family Renewal podcast. I'm Israel Wayne, your host, and today we have the incomparable, the indomitable Sam Sorbo. And for those of you who don't know Sam, Sam is one of the premier proponents of Christian education today. But that isn't necessarily her background. That's not where she started in her journey in life. And so I want to talk with Sam today about that journey and about how she has ended up where she is today, being one of the premier advocates for educational freedom in our nation today. So, Sam, welcome to the Family Renewal Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. And I want to point out that I think when you say Christian education, you're being redundant.
It should be redundant, right? And so we are grateful that you are here to talk about your journey with us. And for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with you, who aren't familiar with your background, you come from a world with a lot of diversity. But I'm not going to tell your story for you. I'm just going to let you start wherever you'd like to pick up in terms of either your spiritual journey, but then more particularly how you started to head into this issue of education being a topic that has become very important to you.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a really broad question. I was not raised with much religion. I was sent to Saturday school as a Jewish girl, and we celebrated Christmas and Easter in the house. So it was a bit of a confusion regarding religion, and that led to basically atheism. And when I was about 12, I just decided that it wasn't worth pursuing anymore. And of course, I would say at least my mother was an atheist. I was in a broken home, so I had stepfathers that didn't sort of stick around. And when I was in my early 20s, I went on a search for truth. I thought, okay, I've achieved success because I had achieved financial success at an early age, and it just didn't seem to satisfy. It was the box that I needed to check, that the school told me I needed to check. You must be financially successful. That's their whole goal, is college prep and career readiness, which is basically, the almighty dollar. And I checked that box and I thought, okay, so now what? Like, stick a fork in me. I'm done. What, just off myself? Like, is this it? This is all there is? So I went on a search and I discovered that there is order in the universe, and that order should have a name just to make it easier for me. So I decided that the name was God. And then I ended up going to a small church with a friend of mine. And that's where I discovered the Christian God and Christianity, and I never looked back. So that's my spiritual journey. Fast forward to, I have 3 kids. They're in school. And well, actually, my oldest was in school. He did 1st and 2nd grade in this lovely little public school that we moved to go to that school. We moved house to find, better schools for our kids. And so we found that school, and he was in 2nd grade, and I did not feel like they were accomplishing education. This had nothing to do with my worldview, my religion, at all, really. It was, they weren't accomplishing education. The homework that they gave him was stupid and banal and boring, and it wasn't challenging him, and I just didn't feel like he was growing. And so at the end of 2nd grade, there were a couple other things. The teacher did some things that kind of miffed me, that sort of worked against me as a parent, I felt. And when I was doing homework with him at the end of the day, I was like, my gosh, this is homeschooling. I'm doing it at the end of the day when everybody's tired and cranky and hungry, and it's no fun at all. And I said to my husband at the end of 2nd grade, I think if I homeschool and fail, he'll still be better off. And part of it was the social interactions that he was having in school. And most of it was the basically the education that I felt that he was getting. And so I decided to homeschool him and his siblings. And it was wonderful and terrifying And I really struggled. But I loved being with my kids, and I loved the interaction that they developed, because up until that point, when my oldest would come home from school, he was like the big school kid, and he would sort of lord it over his siblings. And it was there was a lot of acrimony that developed from that. And when they were basically forced to just work together all day long and be around each other all day long, that acrimony disappeared, and he started to just be the big brother. And you know, it's important that we encourage our children in their relationships with their siblings, not in a reprimanding sort of way, but in an encouraging way. You know, you guys are going to be siblings for the rest of your lives, and so you need to have each other's back. That's what being a big brother is. And so I got the chance to figure that out, really, which if he had stayed in school, I probably wouldn't have figured out. It would have just grown in this sort of competition of I'm older and I'm better, which is, you know, a competition that the schools engender. And so about a year and a half in, I felt so incompetent as a Christian to give my children a Christian education that I sent them to a small Christian classical school as a hybrid program. So it was like just dipping my toe into the school system again. Mm-hmm. And 6 weeks later, I asked for a meeting with the teacher, because I wanted to make sure that I was upholding my end of the bargain, that I was fulfilling my promise, which was to educate them for 3 days a week. And then the school was doing the other 2 days a week. I think it was 3-2. It might've been 2-3, but anyway, because there were some issues with getting the homework to me and stuff like that. So I sat down with one of my children's teachers, and she took about 5 minutes to tell me how well behaved he was. And the whole time she's talking to me, I have this little voice in the back of my head. I don't care. I don't want to know he's well. I know how well behaved he is. I trained him to behave. And what I would have rather heard, and it just struck me, was that he was misbehaved, that he was always raising his hand and asking questions and disrupting because he was so eager to learn. And I realized in that moment, she has a completely different purpose for what she's doing in the classroom. Her purpose is classroom management, and that's not my purpose. And that's not why I'm paying them, for her to manage the students. So I pulled them out, and then I never looked back.
So you mentioned that you felt inadequate to give them a Christian education. One of the things that I hear from most parents when they're considering homeschooling is just that they feel completely inadequate in general, that they feel like, I'm not a certified teacher, I'm not properly trained, I'm not a professional, I'm just a parent. Why is it that so many parents feel completely intimidated and incapable of teaching their own children, even young children? Why is that? How did we get there?
It's the system. It implies this rubric on you. It imposes a rubric. It imposes a paradigm that somebody with a degree that's specific to the teaching of that thing is the only person qualified. But I turn that up on its head, because when I talk to people who are trained school teachers, I try to re-educate them so that they don't bring the classroom into their homes, because the classroom is actually the opposite of education. Our education system accomplishes anti-education, reverse education, de-education, uneducation. I don't know how else to say it. Like, it's the opposite. And the reason that I say that is because education should be a quest for knowledge. Education really should be seeking out truth, beauty, and goodness, which is, in a sense, the face of God, right? That's true education. But let's just dumb it down for the secular community, if you want, right? It's a quest for knowledge. That's what education is. And so if you think about it, what's the first thing that a child learns when he attends school? What's the first thing he learns that he has to do, especially if he wants to ask a question? He has to sit down and shut up. And if he wants to ask a question, he has to raise his hand. This is it's a visceral lesson that's learned, is an impediment. It's a barrier. It's I have to draw attention to myself to learn. I have to ask permission to learn. It's the opposite, right? It's a disruptor. It prevents the learning. It puts a roadblock. And so that's, and by the way, the ultimate lesson of that is don't ask. This really teaches the child, don't ask, just don't ask, right? And so if our first lesson in school is don't ask, but we defined education as a quest for knowledge, which begins with what? What does a quest for knowledge begin with? A question, right? But the first thing that kids learn in school is don't ask. They're accomplishing the opposite. And that's why when children graduate, they're like, oh gosh, I hope I never have to crack another book again. I hope I never have to never take another exam, never go to another class. That's the opposite, right? Education should inspire children to seek more knowledge, not less.
So when you talk about removing your children from the public school system and beginning to homeschool, you talk about how you've learned through that process not to replicate the public school system at home. Earlier, I heard you talking about relationship. When you started homeschooling, how did you find that hybrid, if you will, of coming at this, probably thinking of your primary role as being a teacher, to understanding that a huge part of your homeschooling journey was going to be parenting? What was that like for you, and how do you see that combination working together? How much of what we do as homeschoolers is us with the teacher hat, and how much of what we do as homeschoolers is simply parenting with academics?
Yeah, it's amazing. So they've trained us to think that education is purely academic. I guesstimate that it's about a third academic, like not even half, right? Because ultimately, how often does the Pythagorean theorem serve you on a daily basis? Like the academics are so secondary to the real purpose of education, which is kind of the formation of the whole human being into an adult. It's really shepherding the child into adulthood, discipling the child into adulthood. And so little of that is purely academic. So I've forgotten the question now.
Yeah, just that combination of parenting and teaching, and how does that work together? How much of this process is parenting versus the I'm a school teacher mentality?
So what happens is when you start educating your children, you start to realize, and I remember writing a blog about this. It's actually in my book, They're Your Kids, was the understanding, the realization that every moment is a teaching moment. And so the teacher is constantly on, but in a sense, what it is a rediscovery of what parenting is. So parenting is teaching. And basically they're intertwined so securely that it's anathema to take the teacher out of that and put it in a classroom and have children sit like little birds waiting to be fed. That's why I say our school system is the opposite of education, because education should be just sort of full-time. You're shepherding this child into adulthood. So you're training them, you're parenting them, you're teaching them, you're doing all of those things at once. And then the other part of that is the parents who come to me with their problems, because I coach also, and they say, my child won't sit still for this, or my child won't do the homework, or my child won't whatever. Most of the problems that the parents come to me with are not academic. They're parenting issues. And so the academics are so secondary. to the full thrust of the educational journey for the child. And I think that our schools have really done us a disservice. So you asked why parents feel inept. It's because they've been trained to feel inept.
Mm-hmm.
Our schools are very equipped. In fact, I would say their primary purpose is to teach us how inadequate we are. And in fact, there are quotes about standardized testing will be like a dunce cap to make a child understand just how limited he is. That's what standardized testing was for, right? So when you start to look at it that way and say, okay, so the school system is really not for the best interests of the child, like not even close, like really anti-child, then you have to take a step back and go, okay, so wait, so what is education, right? What am I trying to accomplish? What are my aspirations here? Because I don't know why your aspirations would be that your son gets an A on his calculus exam. That's not going to serve him in the real world anyway. So that might not be the best focus. But if your focus is, I really want my son who's interested in math to be so curious about math that he gets an A on his calculus exam when he's 12, then okay, now you've got an interesting sort of paradigm, because you want to coach his curiosity and you want to get him to a destination. But you better be careful about the destination, because just because it is a destination doesn't mean it's his. And in fact, in Proverbs, the proverb that says, raise up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. The Hebrew for that is actually translated more like, help a child discover who he is created to be. And when he's old, he will not depart from it. And so our job as parents is not so much to instill a bunch of information, which is what the school tells us the job of the educator is. It's just to input data. Okay. That's not our job. Our job is to help the child discover who he is, help him discover his innate giftings, help him cultivate those things and become fully fledged in who he is, in the best version of himself.
So you mentioned about the end goal or the destination. And obviously, we're going to choose different educational approaches based on what our end goal is. If our end goal is we want our children to be economically successful, we may have a certain paradigm that we follow to try to achieve that goal. If we have a different aspiration or final destination, we may choose a different path. So for you as a parent, and I understand that we don't always control outcome. As much as we may try to direct the trajectory, we don't have final control over outcome with our children. But like in an ideal world, if you could look ahead and say, when my children are grown adults and they're 35 years old, my ideal would be that I would like for my children to be this, or to accomplish this, or to have this kind of a mindset, or this kind of a perspective. What would define educational success for you as a parent in an ideal scenario? If you had the opportunity to achieve an ultimate goal, what would that look like for you as a parent?
Yeah, and in fact, this is partly what I train on when I'm training parents. Is you should draw a picture. How do you perceive that your family will be in 5, 10 years and 20 years? What are your hopes and aspirations for your child? Is it the corner office in the Goldman Sachs building in New York City? Or is it, and divorced with 2 kids that shuttle back and forth, like what are your aspirations? And my aspirations were, and by the way, like full disclosure, this developed over a decade, okay, of me home educating my children. Mm-hmm. I finally feel like I figured it out. It took me a long time, which is why I'm so eager to share this with young parents so that they are ahead of the curve, because education can destroy a child just as easily as build them up, and schooling can destroy a child and often does. So my goal for my children is that they are happy, healthy, giving and forgiving Christian citizens of the nation. So, and what's implied in that is that they're responsible, that they are self-sufficient, and that they know how to take care of others. And I think all of those things are very important. We have to teach our children how to love. We have to teach them how to be loving and how to be loved, right? Some people can't accept love. Some people can't accept gifts. And some people don't know how to give. And so I think that those are all very important things. I want my children to be entrepreneurial. That doesn't mean they have to go and build a business. I just want them to have that mindset. So how do you teach that? Well, it's not by sending them into a socialist system to be socialized.
I wanted to ask you this question because a lot of parents that I talk to when the subject of homeschooling comes up, they kind of dig their heels in and say, well, I could see how that might be a necessary choice for some parents, given their geography and where they live. But where I live, we have a great school district. We have a great school. In fact, we moved to this neighborhood to be near this public school. It's that good. And the teachers are Christian, and the principals and the superintendents and the coaches, and they have this wonderful academic success. And so for us, we don't feel the relevance of that. We feel that our school is different. And so how do you respond when a parent basically tells you that they live in Mayberry and that their kids are getting a Leave It to Beaver, Andy Griffith education in their little public school? Is that something that we say, oh, okay, that's wonderful, we're glad you have that, homeschooling isn't really necessary for you? Or is there still an argument that should be made for home education, or at least Christian education in those situations?
Well, I will always make the argument, but I've spoken to large groups of people and explained to them how education system, our school system. I hesitate to call it an education system.
Sure.
Because
right.
It's
the misnomer, right?
Opposite.
The indoctrination system.
Not
right?
broken. Well, and indoctrination with the wrong doctrine, right? I indoctrinated my children. I taught them the correct doctrine. I taught them truth. The doctrine that they have in the schools now. And by the way, the only reason that they are getting away with the indoctrination of children is because they convinced Christians that education was not doctrinal. And so we went along with that. We said, oh, right, it's purely academic. You must know, you're the educators. And so then they made it purely academic, and the academics started failing and failing and failing, right? The academics today are so much worse than they used to be. And now they've taken out the academics and they've shoved in all of this doctrine. So gender theory and CRT and 1619 and all of that stuff has become the doctrine. And we're sitting on the sidelines. The Christians are saying, hey, get your doctrine out of schools. Go back to just the academics. I just want my 3 R's, right? Like frankly, like idiots, because we were schooled. We were not educated. And this comes on us. So the parents that you're speaking of have been schooled, not educated. And so they believe that their school is good. This is the struggle that we have, Israel, is we weren't taught discernment in school because the school doesn't teach discernment. Why? Because if you have discernment, you'll soon figure out that they are, forcing a load of crap on you, that the whole system is a load of crap. So they don't have discernment. So I say to them, and I'm speaking about one couple in particular, they came up to me afterwards. They said, you're absolutely right about the schools. It's terrible what's happening in the schools, and it's awful what they're doing to the kids. And I said, oh, so you homeschool? And they said, well, no, I mean, our child attends a really, really good public school. We have a really good public school. So what I said was, define good. Define good. And you know what their answer was? It's where we went to school. And I looked at them and I said, not the same teachers, not the same textbooks. What is good about it? That your son's locker is 2 lockers down from your locker? What is good? Because it's not the building that's training your child. It's the teachers and the textbooks. It's the curriculum. And the fact that you can't define good besides the fact that, besides it being the same school, which I don't understand how a building remaining a building can be determined to be good, right? I mean, it's absurd, but we haven't been educated. We've been schooled. And so a lot of people are laboring under these completely false, ridiculous assumptions, ridiculous. Oh, my school's really good because the principal's a Christian. That has nothing to do with your child in the classroom. By the way, how soon are you happy for your young boy to be exposed to porn? Because he will be exposed to porn in the school, guaranteed. Oh, they don't allow cell phones in the school. Yeah, I'm sure. And they're doing checks on all the children going in the school. Your private little Christian school is doing checks on every child that enters in the school, like some kind of metal detector on all the children.
CSA at the Christian
and you never
school.
let your children go over and play at Jimmy's house, or you do, but you know the parents. But have you ever asked those parents what kind of precautions they're taking on their cell phones or whatever they're giving their children? Do they have parental controls on all of the stuff in their house, on all the, right? You have no idea. You have no idea what you're sending your children into.
Yeah. So just kind of final question here. Basically, what I think the parents are assuming is that there is a posture of neutrality on the part of the school, that there is religious neutrality. There's historical
no such thing as
neutrality. There's political neutrality.
There's no,
basically, they're just teaching raw, bare facts, and that the parents can supplement with their worldview or their perspective or their religion at home. How do you respond to that?
There is no such thing as neutrality. It's like, what is it? The greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. Okay. The greatest trick the schools played was to convince us that education is separate from doctrine. It's not. And so by convincing us of that, they maintained that they could remain neutral. There is no such thing as a non-religious school. Every school is a religious school. Every school. Pick your doctrine. So if the doctrine is survival of the fittest, they're teaching your children. And the problem is we all went to public school. So we learned survival of the fittest as if it was the law of the land. So for us to impeach that now is very difficult. It's very difficult for us to take any kind of a young earth approach or whatever, because we learned it at such a young age as doctrine, survival of the fittest. Well, what is that? Well, if it's survival of the fittest is true, then there's nothing wrong with rape. There's nothing wrong with abortion. There's nothing wrong with elbowing somebody out of the way in the grocery store and not waiting your turn in line. So why do you wait in line?
Yeah, absolutely. You lose the whole basis for ethics in an evolutionary atheistic worldview. If parents want to get more information from you, let's say that they've listened to this and they say, wow, this is thinking outside the box, and I'm intrigued and I would like to learn more. What would be some resources that you have created and produced that you would direct them to, and how can they get in touch with those resources?
Well, first and foremost, samsorbo.com. I also have a locals community where I'm encouraging parents to speak to each other because everybody's journey is different. I have 3 children, and my journey with my 3 kids for each of them has been remarkably different because they are very different human beings. So I encourage parents to get into community with other families to learn what works for them, what doesn't work for them. So samsorbo.com, I've written several books. The first one was They're Your Kids. That's pretty much my journey into homeschooling, why you should homeschool and how easy it is. I've written a devotional for parents, for families actually, for parents to do with their children, to teach virtues to their children. Children will not learn to be virtuous unless you as the parent purpose to teach them virtue. They will not learn it in any school that I know of It's possible that some of the small Christian schools are intent upon teaching virtue, but I think that as a culture, we've been inculcated with this idea that virtue is just it just happens by accident, just haphazardly. I don't believe that to be true. So I wrote a resource for parents to do with their children. And then my most recent one is the Playbook for Home Learning, which is a series of 15 videos that live online over on Locals, actually. And so you can purchase it via samsorbo.com and then watch the videos. And it is this training. It's training parents how to rethink the way that they think about education, to undo some of the damage that the schools have done, because I maintain that the schools have and continue to be child abuse, but they were not non-abusive to us as children, Israel. Although I know you don't have that background. I went to school, I went to public school, and I will tell you that it did harm me. Now, it did do good things for me too. I mean, I did get my idea of what education is via the schools. So I'm not completely knocking them, but I think at this point we can all agree that they are just so abusive today that you'd be an idiot to send your child into that system.
You also have a podcast. Tell our listeners about that.
Yeah, fair enough. Sam Sorbo, the Sam Sorbo show is available pretty much everywhere. If you go to samsorbo.com, you can find all my resources. Everything, my whole life is right there.
Excellent. I also want to encourage our listeners that if you have a favorite conference that you attend that is connected to these topics, either a homeschooling conference or a Christian education conference, or even something on family and parenting, reach out to that conference and have them contact Sam to have her come as a speaker. She is a dynamic speaker, great encouragement to parents. I think especially those parents who have become convinced by the school system that they are incapable and inadequate of teaching their own children. I think Sam is one of the greatest encouragers and voices of advocacy for parental involvement in education and parental control over education.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big fan of what you do, Sam. I appreciate you, my friend, and I'm grateful for you joining us. So appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. God bless.